There are moments in history that defy explanation, events so terrifying, so profoundly unnatural that those who witness them are never the same again. Whispers of such occurrences spread like wildfire, passed from lips trembling with fear. Some call them mass hysteria. Others claim they are proof of something far more sinister, something that exists beyond the veil of our understanding, lurking just out of sight. But what if an entire crowd, dozens, maybe even 100 people, saw the same horror unfold before their very eyes? What if there were no illusions, no tricks of the mind, just a single, undeniable nightmare, etched forever into their memories? Tonight, we explore one such event, a terror that was not confined to a single soul, nor hidden in the recesses of a fevered mind, but witnessed collectively by an entire assembly of unsuspecting individuals. Some would call it a shared hallucination. Others insist it was something much worse. Those who were there will never forget what they saw. Many refuse to speak of it at all. And those who do, their voices waver, their eyes dart to unseen phantoms, as if the very act of remembering invites something back into their lives. What they saw was not meant for human eyes. And yet, for those fleeting moments, 100 people bore witness to the impossible. What was it? How did it happen? And why is it that, even years later, the survivors of that night still claim that it's not over? Tonight, we delve into the chilling, enigmatic horror that left 100 people forever changed. And as you listen, ask yourself, if so many saw it, could it happen again? Could you be next? Horror, in its purest form, often lingers in the forgotten corners of history. An inexplicable event, a whispered legend, a stain upon reality that refuses to fade. The horror witnessed by 100 people on that fateful night did not emerge from nowhere. It had roots, deep and tangled, stretching back further than anyone could have imagined. To understand what happened, we must go back to a time before the witnesses were even born, before the town itself existed, before there was anything at all, except for the land, the darkness, and something buried beneath it. Long before the first buildings were raised, before streets were carved into the soil, the land where the event took place was a desolate expanse, avoided by those who knew its secrets. The indigenous tribes who once dwelled nearby spoke of it only in hushed tones. To them, it was a place of unrest, where the earth itself breathed with something unnatural. They believed that no living thing should set foot there, lest they disturb the nameless force that slumbered beneath the ground. Legends tell of a forbidden ritual, one that was never meant to be completed. A summoning, a calling, an attempt to bring forth something older than mankind itself. The ritual was interrupted, the details lost to time, but the land was never the same again. Those who lingered too long on its soil spoke of hearing whispers that did not belong to this world. Shadows moved without light, and most disturbing of all, those who dared to sleep near that place never woke the same, if they woke at all. Centuries passed, civilizations rose and fell, and eventually the land was forgotten. Then, in the late 1800s, settlers arrived, oblivious to the warnings of the past. They built upon it, shaping a town atop the remnants of something they should have left buried. At first, everything seemed normal. But then, people began disappearing. At first, it was attributed to the wilderness, wolves, accidents, the dangers of the unknown. But the disappearances continued. Whole families vanished overnight, their homes left untouched, their meals still warm on the table. Those who remained spoke of strange occurrences, unfamiliar voices calling their names in the dead of night, unseen figures watching from just beyond the flickering candlelight. doors opening to rooms that had no right to exist. The town was abandoned within a decade. The few who survived refused to say why. Official records dismissed it as a failed settlement, but local folklore tells a different story. One whispered among the town's descendants for generations, "There are places that were never meant to be touched. We are not alone, and we were never meant to see them." Those who do never see anything else again. For decades, the land lay dormant, until the night when 100 people gathered in the town's ruins for what was supposed to be a simple event, a celebration, a night of curiosity and spectacle. But what they saw that night was not meant for them, and whatever was disturbed that evening was waiting. The night was supposed to be a harmless gathering, a historical reenactment, a bit of local folklore brought to life for curious minds. The town, long abandoned, had become a place of intrigue, a forgotten relic of the past. That night, a group of 100 people had gathered within the skeletal remains of what was once the town square. They were historians, amateur ghost hunters, thrill seekers, and skeptics alike. Some had come for the history, others for the stories, a few for the sheer excitement of wandering through the ruins under a moonless sky. The air was cold, unnaturally so for that time of year, as if the land itself exhaled an icy breath upon those who dared to stand upon it. A large bonfire had been set in the center of the square, its flames casting long, wavering shadows against the decayed buildings. The event organizers had planned a dramatic retelling of the town's forgotten past, a performance designed to thrill but not to terrify. A storyteller stood before the crowd, his voice rising over the crackling flames, recounting the grim legend of the land beneath their feet. But then, something changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up without reason. The fire flickered, its glow suddenly dimming, as if something unseen had passed in front of it. The storyteller hesitated, as though some primal instinct screamed at him to stop speaking. But he continued. And then came the first scream. It erupted from the crowd, shattering the tense silence that had fallen over the gathering. A woman, standing near the edge of the ruins, clutched her head, her eyes wide with terror. She stumbled backward, mumbling incoherently, her body trembling. "What is it? What's wrong?" someone asked. But before she could answer, another cry rang out. Then another. A man staggered forward, his face pale, his pupils dilated as if he had seen something beyond human comprehension. His breathing was ragged, his mouth opening and closing in silent horror. The atmosphere grew heavy, suffocating, as if an unseen force had wrapped around the entire crowd, pressing upon their chests, making it harder to breathe. People started shifting uncomfortably, looking around in confusion. The air smelled wrong, a damp, decayed scent, like soil freshly unearthed. And then, the fire died completely. Darkness swallowed the square. A wave of panic surged through the crowd as the only source of light vanished in an instant. Shuffling footsteps, rapid breaths, whispered prayers. No one could see, but everyone could feel something. The wind howled, though the trees did not move. A deep, resonant hum, like a sound that did not belong in this world, filled the air. It was low, vibrating in their bones, pressing against their skulls. And then, they saw it. A figure standing at the center of where the fire had been. At first, it looked human. But as the darkness shifted, revealing it in pieces, glimpses of it caught in the fractured light of the distant stars, they realized it was not. Its limbs were too long. Its body blurred at the edges, as if it were struggling to exist in this reality. Its face, if it could be called that, was nothing but a gaping black void, shifting and twisting, a hole in space itself. And then it moved, not with the hesitation of something discovering its surroundings, but with the certainty of something that had been waiting, watching, knowing. 100 people stood frozen in place, their minds trying to reject what their eyes could not unsee. Some tried to turn away to run, but their bodies did not obey. They were trapped, locked in place, forced to bear witness to something no human was ever meant to see. The figure tilted its head, and then it opened its mouth, not to speak, not to scream, but to consume. A blackness poured from its mouth, something shapeless, writhing, alive. The sound that came with it was indescribable. A deep, guttural, hungry noise that rattled their bones and clawed into their minds. The first person dropped, then the next, collapsing like marionettes whose strings had been severed. Some clutched their heads, eyes wide with terror, but unseeing. Others simply stopped moving, their bodies standing rigid, their mouths hanging open in silent horror. And still, the figure watched. Still, it fed. Panic erupted. Those who could still move staggered backward, trampling over one another in a desperate attempt to escape the unseen force that had begun claiming them, one by one. The air itself seemed to pulse, thick and oppressive, as if something vast and incomprehensible was pressing down upon them from above. The ground beneath their feet shifted. It was subtle at first, like standing on unstable earth, but then it pulsed again. A low vibration, a rhythmic thrum that seemed to synchronize with the rapid, terrified heartbeats of the remaining witnesses. Something was waking up. The figure in the center of the square did not move, not in a way something alive should move. It seemed to flicker, like an image struggling to stay fixed in place. One moment, it was standing still. The next, it was inches from a man in the front row, without ever having taken a step. The man did not scream. He didn't even react. His pupils had dilated so wide that his eyes looked completely black, his jaw slack, as he stared directly into the void where the figure's face should have been. Then, as if pulled by invisible hands, his head tilted back, his body convulsed violently, and a soundless, gurgling exhale escaped his lips. His skin withered. It happened in an instant, flesh shriveling, collapsing inwards, sinking into his bones, as if something had drained him from the inside. His eyes, once so full of terror, darkened, not from death, but from something much worse. The body fell. And then, it moved again. The dead man stood up, not like someone recovering from a fall. His body jerked unnaturally, lifted by something unseen, something inside him. His head snapped toward the crowd, his blackened eyes fixed upon the living. A woman shrieked, her voice cracking into hysteria. She turned to run, but froze mid-step, her entire body locked into place as if some invisible force had gripped her spine. Then, just like the man before her, she began to wither, her skin pulling tight over her bones, her expression frozen in an eternal silent scream. She crumpled, and then she stood. The realization crashed upon the remaining witnesses like a tidal wave of dread. This thing wasn't killing them. It was taking them. The ground throbbed again, louder now, stronger. The earth beneath their feet split in jagged, uneven cracks, revealing something not soil, not stone, but movement. Something beneath them was shifting. A sound rose from the depths, a chorus of whispers, voices overlapping, distorting, growing louder and louder until they became a deafening, inhuman wail. Somewhere in the chaos, someone turned on a flashlight. A single beam of artificial light cut through the impossible dark, and for the first time, they saw. The ground was not just cracking. It was opening. Not like an earthquake, not like something natural. The dirt peeled back deliberately, like something was pushing its way through from below. And then, they saw the hands. Hundreds of them. Thousands, pale, elongated, writhing hands, stretching out from the abyss beneath them. Some clawed at the air. Others twitched in unnatural spasms. And some reached for the living. A man near the back let out a scream as fingers wrapped around his ankle. He was pulled downward, fast. He clawed at the ground, his hands scraping against loose dirt and broken stone, but there was nothing to hold on to. Another person lunged to grab him, but the moment their fingers met, he was gone. The hole in the earth swallowed him whole. Then another, and another. One by one, the witnesses were dragged downward into the writhing mass of hands, their screams cut short the moment they vanished into the abyss. And through it all, the figure remained, watching, waiting. It had never needed to move. It had never needed to chase them. It had already won. The darkness was spreading, and soon there would be nowhere left to run. The last remaining survivors ran. It didn't matter where, anywhere but here. Their lungs burned, their legs screamed for relief, but the terror pressing against their minds overpowered every instinct except one: escape. But the ruins of the town were no longer as they had been. The familiar paths, the crumbling buildings, they were different now. Twisting, shifting, warping in ways that defied all logic. They ran down what should have been a road, only to find themselves right back in the square. The fire pit, now nothing more than a blackened void, stretched wide, consuming what was left of the ground. The hands were everywhere, clawing at the air, waiting for the next victim to stumble too close. The dead, those who had fallen first, stood in a circle around the figure, their bodies swaying unnaturally, their empty, hollow eyes watching the living with something beyond mere hunger. And then, the figure moved again, not flickering this time, not shifting, but stepping forward, deliberately, with purpose. The few survivors who remained could feel something pushing against their minds, a force, ancient and malevolent, invading their thoughts. It was inside them now, whispering, promising, calling. You have seen. You belong to us. One of them, a young man, his face streaked with dirt and tears, fell to his knees, his hands clawing at his own skin as if trying to peel something away. His mouth opened in a silent wail, and his body collapsed inward. His bones cracked, his flesh folded, his form twisting into something no longer human. Then he stood, another servant to the thing that watched. The remaining few screamed. There was no escaping, no fighting. They had witnessed something not meant for human eyes, and now they were part of it. The figure turned, slowly, deliberately, toward the last woman standing. A historian, one of the event organizers. She stood paralyzed, her body refusing to move, even as tears streamed down her face. The thing raised one skeletal hand and pointed at her. A whisper filled her mind. Run. She did. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She just ran. But she was the only one who did. The others, they did not move. They simply stood there, their bodies swaying in that same unnatural rhythm, as if their souls had been stolen, leaving behind only empty husks. She did not stop running until she saw the glow of car headlights in the distance, the parking lot, the only thing that remained real. Behind her, the town was gone. Where there had been ruins, there was only an empty field. No buildings, no roads, no signs that anyone had ever been there. Only a single blackened mark on the ground. And silence. So much silence. She was found wandering the road at dawn, catatonic, mumbling words no one could understand. When the authorities searched for the others, they found nothing. No evidence of a town, no bonfire remains, no signs that 100 people had ever been there. All that was left was a single, horrifying account from the woman who had escaped, and even she refuses to speak of it now, because the thing they saw, it never left, and she knows it is still watching. Some stories are meant to be told, some legends are meant to be shared, but some things should never be spoken of. The woman who escaped that night has never returned to the ruins. Not that she could if she wanted to. No trace of that town remains. No maps record its existence. No documents confirm that it was ever there. The land where it once stood is empty, a place untouched by time. But those who have heard her story, they believe, because she is not the only one. Over the years, whispers have emerged, others in different places, telling the same story. Groups of people disappearing without a trace. The same shifting darkness. The same flickering figure. The same impossible void. And the same warning. Once you have seen it, you belong to it. Some say the event was a mass hallucination, that the woman suffered from trauma so deep that her mind created the horrors she described. But others, they know better. Because some things don't need to be believed to be real. And those who witnessed the horror that night, they may be gone. But something else took their place. And perhaps even now, in the silence of the night, if you listen closely, you might hear the whispers of the ones who never left.